Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another 30 minutes of chat this lunchtime for All Women's Week and International Women's Day. My name's Christina Lewis, and I am here today with Sue Stephenson. Sue, thank you so much for your time today. I'm really excited about this lunchtime's interview because, to my shame, this is something that I knew nothing about. Sue has held a very particular position, which is the High Sheriff of the East Riding of Yorkshire. It's got a fascinating history. So I'm going to start, Sue, by asking you, the High Sheriff of East Yorkshire, what is that role? What does it entail?
Well, I am the past High Sheriff. I stood down roughly this time last year. We served for a year. The High Sheriff role has existed for over 1,000 years. So it's new kid on the block, really. It's the oldest secular role under the Crown. And in historical times, it was the Crown's representative in the shires, out in the great lands outside of London, to keep the peace, to dispense law. So it still carries the theme of being Her Majesty as representative of law and order. But now, of course, we no longer have an army. We don't collect taxes anymore. Think of the Sheriff of Nottingham. We don't do any of those things either. And it's now a ceremonial role, but it's a very active role in the community. And it is there, obviously, to support law and order, the judiciary. And modern sheriffs get very engaged with the life in their own community, particularly protecting the vulnerable or discouraging people who may go towards a life of crime and general well-being in the community. So 1,000 years of history, but it took until 2001 for a lady to be chosen as High Sheriff for what were known as the York clans. So you can actually go back and look through the great scrolls of everyone's names, and you will not find a woman's name until 2001. So it took a while.
That's incredible. And that very impressive looking sword to your right there. Can we talk about that?
Oh, well, yes, you can. This beautiful sword was loaned to me by a lovely friend of mine called Tim Vernon, whose father and grandfather were both sheriffs. And it was used during my year of office. Fascinated the young and the old. But the reason it's on the back table is, I thought, appropriate for this week. It was actually used to proclaim Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. So given that we have a very long-serving and dedicated monarch, it just seemed appropriate this week that I let you have a little look at the sword that was used by that High Sheriff at that time to proclaim Her Majesty. Caused a lot of fascination amongst the young and the old when I was High Sheriff, mainly people who wanted to know if I'd ever used it. Have I ever killed anyone with it? So it's a very beautiful thing, and I'm very grateful to have been lent this piece of history, really, and to have been able to take it out and about for people to hold and see. So I'll pop it back down.
And we were just talking earlier, Sue, weren't we, about the fact that that ladies were not allowed to carry a sword. That's right, isn't it?
I was still not. I say it took 1,000 years to be called to the role of sheriff. I was the 7th in the East Riding, so a bit like buses, we all come together now. So we're getting the hang of it. But no, gentlemen look rather splendid in their ceremonial outfit, their breeches, and they wear the sword. But ladies don't. We didn't have a historic uniform, and obviously, historically, women did not carry a sword. And so even now we don't. So usually that you're led in a ceremonial event by perhaps a police cadet, or generally it's someone younger you choose. But I actually chose my own daughter to choose it. I'm not allowed to carry it, but I chose my daughter to carry it for the legal service last year. So we're beginning to move a little bit, I think it's fair to say, into the 21st century, yeah.
So what's the process of being chosen to be a High Sheriff? How does it work?
Well, there's no job application. You are approached, and it is literally in those terms, you are approached to ask if you would agree to your name going forward. There is a panel of individuals that meet to consider names. How those names are put in and how they're put in, how they're discussed is something that's entirely It's entirely confidential. It has a role for the panel to actually look at people in the county that might be suitable. And if you agree to have your name put forward, then you go through quite a laborious process, really. 3 years running, your name is announced in the High Court in the November of each year. It's a very exciting process. It's all these nervous nominees sitting in the High Court. It's the only time I've ever been in the High Court and not felt physically sick, because normally I was in there working. So you would be thinking, I hope I've got this right. Whereas actually, when you're just sitting in the seat waiting, it's a little bit easier. But then your name is read out, and that gives opportunity, obviously, at large, if there was a problem, for people to bring that forward. And then just about now, next week, Her Majesty will, in fact, choose the next name that will be released as sheriff, and that individual will take over in April. So it's something done personally by Her Majesty the Queen. It's her personal appointment. Wow. And there's a bit of history to how she does that too. I don't know.
I was hoping you were going to tell this story.
Well, I let you into this as well. She chooses the name of her sheriff by pricking the name with a silver bodkin. It's about so long, huge, and she actually punctures the roll. It's called the sheriff's roll. She pricks the name of the individual that she chooses, and she does this in Privy Council in the March of each year, and she chooses 55 nationally. So our county, which is called East Riding, but it comprises Hull and East Riding, one of the 55. And it's not until that happens that the name, the nominee, is able to say that I will be High Sheriff. So she pricks it. And then you go ahead and swear allegiance subsequently at a declaration ceremony a little while later. But it was pricked. Your name was pricked, it is said. Being a sheriff wasn't very popular. Now there's no public money involved. It's funded by the individual, no strain on the public purse, and it was always the same. So going back 1,000 years and closer to history, you can imagine the expense of raising armies, of defending the peace, and people used to try, it is said, to get out of it. So as very few people could read, they would send someone clever down to London who could read and actually seek to have the name removed, it is said, from the roll. And from that point, because people were getting quite good at it, the story goes that the monarch then pricked the vellum so that the hole in the skin of the roll could not then be obliterated. So hence, even now, the monarch pricks the name.
Wow, that's such a fascinating piece of history.
It is interesting. I mean, it's said that Queen Elizabeth I was the person who did this. I'm not sure, but I don't hold with this, because it's said that she was embroidering in a garden when the list was brought. I just always saw Elizabeth as someone a bit more feisty than that.
Embroidering, would she? I can't see
it's possibly that. So. It's possibly so, but having said that, it would appear from the roll when it's examined that it goes further back than Elizabeth. But that's the story, and it's still to this day called the pricking ceremony, because it's quite clear that the names were pricked. So you have names going back endlessly, 1,000 years, and each name has this hole pinned against it. So there we go.
So you were the High Sheriff from April 2019 to April 2020.
Correct.
What are some of your standout moments? Because I know that you were really, really active in that time. We've had a chat about it previously. If you could choose some particular moments that were really special to you, what would they be?
Well, I mean, it was a huge privilege the whole year. I'm not sure where to start, really, in terms of the things that you see and you witness, which are ceremonial or a spectacle. Obviously, going to the Queen's Gallery in Westminster Abbey was a massive privilege. To be invited to the garden party, that was a wonderful thing to do. To lead the legal service in the East Riding with our own judiciary and lawyers and police officers, that was tremendous. But for me, and I said this at the declaration of my successor, who asked me the same sort of question, it was the people, because all my outstanding moments came from meeting people. So you had a tremendous untapped, I thought unknown. I thought I knew my area pretty well. Of the tremendous people who are doing so much voluntary work and community work to actually keep things glued together. So the agencies, it was wonderful to visit them. I mean, the bravery of the police officers, the fire officers, ambulance crews, all of those people, phenomenal. And I don't detract in any way, the armed forces, but I almost expected that. But to see what's being done on a daily basis in Hull and East Riding is tremendous. An army, literally, of people who work for nothing or very, very little, to provide for those with even less. So fantastic, really. Wonderful children in after school clubs. I led on older people's issues. So I had some tremendous times in old people's homes, and my engagement with the OPPG, the Older People's Partnership Group, launching the OPPG Older People's Week. That was tremendous.
Oh, yes. Fabulous.
So that was tremendous. They asked me to go and open that. Wonderful. And for Sirius Academy, I was asked to do their parents' evening, end of term prize giving, thinking it would be a fairly modest event. And it was fairly close to the event. They then said, oh, by the way, Sue, it's in the bonus arena. So, so that was wonderful. But it was tremendous to see the youngsters awarded their prizes for all kinds of endeavour. And to see the future being rolled out, really. It was a wonderful experience, but my standout is the people of this area. Absolutely, without a doubt, they are awe-inspiring, really.
Yeah, I agree. And so many people just getting about their thing on a daily basis without any media attention or spotlighting, just very quietly forging on.
Yep, sure, unsung, really, in many ways, but undeterred in that they are out there doing what they believe in, and what will make a difference very close to their own community often. So yeah, it was a tremendous experience, but we're very fortunate, the area that we live in. It's very generous. I mean, I am a Yorkshire lass, but it's a very generous community. That was all the jokes they tell about we Yorkshire folk. It is a generous community in terms of how people do support and give time.
So if we talk about your career, because you had a very long career in the public sector, you were chief lawyer, head of legal services in Leicester, and interestingly, the first female to hold that position as well.
True.
Yeah. So can we just talk a little bit about that? Kind of what are your standout moments, how you kind of got into that role?
Yes, I mean, it's so far back now, but I went from the traditional route. So I suppose people might think it was a very traditional progression, really, from school to university to law school. I chose a degree that I absolutely fortunately loved. Lots of people have to choose what they like later, but I was lucky. I chose what I wanted to do, although I was dissuaded by the careers advisor at the time. I think meant well, but no girl had ever gone to study law from my school. So I think they did their best to make me wonder whether it was a wise decision. I don't know what they would think of me now. It would be interesting.
Did they, out of interest, did they offer any alternatives as to what you might like to do?
They did, and they're both excellent careers, but were seen, you've got to remember how far back we're going now. They were seen then as more suitable for females. So teaching, a wonderful career, very much teaching, social work, one of the caring professions, very much seen as something that I might enjoy to do. Referred me to probation services, quite avant-garde at the time, but the chap who was in charge of probation services, I went to see, and he knew what my ambition was, and he was brilliant, because instead of saying, well, come and try and be, come and work with us, he said, why don't you go and do what you believe you want to do, which I thought I was 17 at the time. So I think that was quite a strong pointer to say, there's lots of things you could do, but what do you want to do? So I did that, then went to law school, obviously in London, and then did my, what was then called training contract, articles of clerkship, and did that in local government. I did that in local government and got the bug. I mean, I have to say, again, would I have enjoyed something else? Well, quite probably, but I really started that and I loved it. so that was where I then spent 2 years. But as you say, I in my first appointments in Leicester, things did move fairly swiftly. I put my hat in the ring for various jobs, and yeah, looking back, yes, it was. I must have had a certain amount of determination then, as a sort of a late 20s, saying, well, this is what I want to do. And I was very lucky. I had an excellent mentor. Again, my boss was called Derek, and I remember him asking me, what did I really want to do? And I suppose really in a light-hearted moment, well, what I really want is your chair, which I didn't mean in any kind of arrogant way, but as in, I really want this career. This is what I want to do. And bless him, he's no longer with us. But when I took my first head of service appointment, he was no longer there, but he took the trouble to deliver me his chair. And it took.
Oh, fabulous.
So that was, I've been very lucky in terms of, there's two indications of people that pointed me early on to carry on in what was quite a difficult setting then. I mean, there were not so many women studying law then as there are now. Brilliantly now, the majority actually are now in law school are women. But then it was a rarer beast, really. And then subsequent to my children were born whilst we were in Leicester, and that was obviously a wonderful, if somewhat hair standing on end, hectic time.
Yeah.
I must have had more than 24 hours in a day then, I think. I must have had, because I don't know how we fitted it all in. I've got no idea. But that was tremendous. So by the time the children were born, Harriet was a tiny baby, I had achieved this this position, which I loved. And then you have to learn to balance everything a little. So.
Yeah, I keep reading, even now it's still a question people ask this. Can women have it all? Can we have it all? Can we have the career? Can we have the children? Can we have the family life? You've kind of touched upon that, but it's such an interesting question, isn't it? Because what do we mean by having it all? It's such a subjective thing.
And it's a really good question. And it's a question that I was asked. I was interviewed in the late 80s. Harriet was born in late 80s, and I was interviewed pretty much, I think, when I got the job, actually. And the angle actually was, it was about the glass ceiling, and the angle actually was about women who wanted it all. And I was actually bemused then, as I am now, as to why that would be seen as wanting it all. I didn't see it in that sense at all. I mean, I wanted my career. I love my career. But obviously in my case, and it's not for everyone, but I also wanted a family. And I think it's a question of how you then work through that. I think for the women of my generation and the women that have followed me, it's about sometimes just having to take stock and maybe at certain times reevaluate whether you need to take a step back, or do you slow your pace a bit so that you can, when I was at work, it was easier to get an afternoon off in the 80s to have your boiler fixed than to go to sports day. It was just seen as, if that's what you want to be, then you sort it out, as opposed to, I would hope, a better understanding now that it just takes a bit of flexibility, and a lot of things can be achieved. So yeah, I don't see it as having wanted all in any bigger way than a father wants to have some time at home with their kids and wants to be at sports day and parents' night and football fields in wet afternoons or whatever. I think it's about an understanding of the balance between working and family life, and how you achieve that and keep your sanity, as well. And in my case, I suppose, I stayed down in Leicester for about, 16 months, because my husband came up here for his career, and I didn't want to give up my new job and almost prove the folk who would say, well, of course, as soon as she got it with her babies, she then gave in. So I stayed down, and it was great, but it was difficult for everyone. And so I made a decision then that I would move up, and took half a step back, I suppose, in that I gave up a really senior job and then took another job up here, which I loved, really interesting, met some great people. And then once the children were settled, if you like, in a way, and we had a rhythm and we found our life here, then I set to again and then took up my second head of legal post, which was the first head of legal for the New East Riding, as it was then in '96. There was that, and then subsequently after that, then I took the directorship of corporate resources, which was everything, all the professions really, all grouped along with the lawyers, the financiers, the engineers, HR. That was tremendous. Absolutely loved it. The corporate end of things.
Yeah.
So that sort of a helter-skelter way through my career, really. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And I still love being a mum. And I loved being a mum. I loved it when they were tiny. Some of it's hard. I think you do birch yourself a little bit when it's been a very long day, or you read the bedtime story a bit quick. But on the other hand, I'm sure dads do as well, you know?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of guilt, isn't there, tied up in parenthood. There's always, what could you have done differently? Or like you say, maybe you read the bedtime story a bit too quick, or you're not there for tea, or whatever it is, and you feel a lot of guilt about it.
Yeah, you do. I mean, I was really lucky because I had the support of my mum. I mean, my dad had died when I was very young, and she was a phenomenon, really. She was just a tour de force, and she encouraged me out and out, go do. But I was very lucky because she came to live with us from, I think the kids were 7 and 9, and that was when I then things were able to take off again, if you like, because I didn't have to worry as much,
That support is so important, isn't it? If you can get that support, it's invaluable.
If you can, and for the people that don't, it is even harder, and that needs to be understood. If you need to go because the child needs to be collected, you need to go. And there are very few things I've found in life. You can't walk out of court. I'm sure you can't walk out of an operating theatre or in the middle of an operation. But there are, and many jobs, you can't just walk away. But with a sensitive manager, most things can wait till a little later in the day or the next day. But we sometimes, I think, create everything as an imperative. I have to do it now to prove it has to be done now. But yeah, I look back, I think it was yesterday, but clearly it was not.
Well, that kind of brings me on to my next question. And in that, over your career, have you seen things change for women? Are you seeing more opportunities? Are we moving in the right direction in terms of equality, more opportunities, more diversity?
I hope so. I don't think all is settled or all is resolved. I think I'd love to hear from a group of younger women doing it now, how they actually feel. But looking back at being almost an unusual example, so an unusual choice to leave school and do law, unusual choice of career. And I was interviewed, is that an engagement ring on your finger? Do you intend to marry? Do you intend to have children? Hopefully that is not part of, interview technique now. Those things certainly, and the things I'm sure happen now where people try to psych you a little bit. When you're a very young advocate, they look at you and, I still remember walking past very experienced advocates going, this will be a pushover. And you have to steel yourself really for that. And then the best way to deal with it really is in a sense, doing your job. And the greatest satisfaction then is knowing that you did it and you did it as well as you could. And you get strength from that. But I generally speaking, I work with some tremendous men and women through my careers. And I think it's a question of their attitude and yours. I think women now at least are role models. There were fewer in my time, a lot of them in the history books, but fewer that I knew. So you can look around now, very senior women in the police, in the church. We have a female bishop, Bishop Allison. You see very senior judges. Until last year, the most senior judge in the country, Baroness Hale, female. You see examples across every sector, fire officers, police, surgeons, doctors. You see people, tremendous East Riding reputation of women entrepreneurs. There are then at least examples. Journalism, TV. You look at the shift between when I used to watch TV programs, you know, with my parents, you'd sit and watch the news. It was very much male dominated, and I'm not sure how many women thought they'd like to be in front of the camera, maybe. But if you look at the news now, it at least is there as almost a possibility. So what I would say is, I'm sure it's not resolved across the piece. I'm sure that there are some steep hills to climb, but some things have improved, but we're not there. And I think the glass ceiling, is probably alive and well in some places, and it's our job to go through it.
Nothing it.
Yes, but do it through achievement. Really, do it. You know, do it by doing what we do. I think really would be good. I mean, I more often than not had an all male management team that worked with me, and I can honestly say in the room, you'd have to ask them, I suppose, but I'm fairly confident in saying I don't think we saw each other as an anything in particular. You know, we, in terms of what gender we thought we were, we just saw each other as the person who was advising on this or advising on that or whatever. And that was a really good time, really, because you're recognizing individuals on an equal footing, and it felt equal. But it's achieving that feeling. I am under no illusions. I mean, there have been plenty of examples of the opportunity taken to try and dissuade you from achieving. And I always say to any young person that I meet, particularly young women, don't be put off. You know, don't be put off by that. Take it and use it. Take it and use it as a strength. So, yeah.
Brilliant advice. Let's talk about what you're doing now, because you're involved with two fabulous charities, and I must confess, one of them I didn't actually realise, and I don't know if other people will, but it actually is a charity. So would you mind just talking a little bit about the voluntary work that you're involved in currently?
Well, when I finished work, obviously, whilst I was at work, the stuff was limited really to stuff connected with ad hoc stuff for the kids. But once I retired, I left work to look after my mum, who sadly had a stroke. And after she died, it was, you know, I was a little bit like a fish out of water in a sense. But these two brilliant opportunities came up. They came my way, as things do in life. Yeah. The Deep, I've been a trustee director at the Deep for some time now. It's the only surviving Millennium project. Obviously, it's an iconic building for Hull, absolutely. And obviously, a chief executive, a woman, leads what I think is really a tremendous, together with her team, because it is a team there, leads a tremendous piece of conservation work. I don't know whether anyone spotted the Deep logo, which is very proudly worn for Hull, obviously, on David Attenborough's programme a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, no, I didn't see that.
Yeah, there was one of the staff who was funded to go out and do some work in far-flung places with turtles. Shoshana was there, and she was proudly wearing her Deep logo, flying the flag from the other side of the world for Hull.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Excellent. So the conservation work that's done there is immense, and as is the commitment that they have to inclusion. So the work that they do to make the Deep available for people who otherwise would not be able to go. So, you know, they have lights on nights for youngsters and people who are distracted by darkness and flickering lights, and they have the opposite, where in fact the lights are down. They do sleepovers, they include, you know, they are very inclusive. So it's been a privilege really to work with them, and the penguins are very cute.
They are really cute.
But it's been a difficult year because, of course, it's a building that thrives on footfall, and there hasn't been any or hardly any. But they've done a tremendous job of keeping the collection alive and well, and really waiting for the doors to open. So that's really interesting aspect. And it wasn't something that had been part of my past interest, if you like. The business, yes, and so really it is run as a business. So that was very much my interest. But obviously to learn so much about conservation has been tremendous. Really. that's been good. And then my other big passion is the hospital charity, which I've been involved in since it was created. Our wonderful region didn't have an independent charity raising funds, so people are very generous to the hospitals and NHS, but there was no proactive fundraising. So I was sort of, well, you get a phone call and then you meet for coffee, and then it was just a little, you know, would you just look over the trust deed for us? Would you mind? And then it was what about? And in the end, I'm not quite sure how it happened, but I ended up then being the chair, which I've been the chair for a little while. Absolutely massively proud of what Wish has achieved. I mean, not me. I mean, there's a board of trustees who work very hard, and a tremendous crew of people who support the hospital, you know, day in, day out. We've now got our own office, and we've got 2 people working for us, which is a massive achievement from a charity that started with very little, a few pence really, to now what was last year huge for the whole hospitals. It's about a year as now, when we were locked in, my last couple of weeks as sheriff, we launched the COVID-19 appeal to support the staff, and that the generosity of people in this area has been phenomenal. And I'm pleased to say that almost all of the money that came in has already been spent back in the hospital. So there's no big coffer sitting there waiting. It went back in, and this time it was the staff who said what they needed. So during the pandemic, we wanted to know what they needed, what would help them to get through something that's been physically and emotionally massively draining for a lot of people in the infirmary. So yeah, hats off to the wonderful people locally that have been so generous. We then took a significant donation thanks to Captain Sir Tom's charity, and that came into whole. That's also been spent. So yeah, it's something that will endure, and it's something that our region needed. It's to do over and above what the NHS can do. It's not replacing what the NHS should be spending its cash on. It's the things that you couldn't reasonably expect the NHS to do. So that's been really exciting, and I think it'll keep me out of trouble for a bit longer, as will the deep. Hopefully. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, our time is nearly up, Sue, but I've got one last question for you, and it's a bit of a throwaway question, but the answers have been really interesting this week. And it is, if you're having a dinner party, what 5 guests would you invite? And they can be real, they can be fictional, alive, or not with us anymore.
Well, I mean, I'm going to be entirely fair to listeners, viewers, to say that you did tip me off. There may be a blindside question, and I thought, what might it be? So I've had a little think if it was a guest for dinner. It'd be great to have someone in. First of all, that would be lovely. But try to link it in a little bit to make it an interesting table based on what we've just been talking about, really. So I would please like Elizabeth I, so we can put to bed the question of did she or didn't she with the embroidery needle. I think we need to know.
We need to get to the bottom of that one.
We need to know this. But I'd like to invite then Maya Angelou, who is the American civil rights activist, campaigner and poet, because I think if you're having a dinner party, you should try and make it interesting for your guests as well. And I think Elizabeth's understanding of the discovery of the Americas and what then Maya would have to say about her experience and life in the 50s and 60s would make for some interesting chat, I think. Of course, inspirational really, in that it was Angelou who said, which I think is quite useful for women following on, people won't remember what you did, they won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And I think if you are a woman that's working at a senior level, it's well worth remembering that how you make people feel in terms of their confidence in themselves will put them and you in good stead. So then I would then like Dame Judi Dench, because she is a great raconteur. She played Elizabeth I, so she can have a little chat to Elizabeth as well. She obviously Shakespeare, so Elizabeth and she can have a little chat about Will. And she used to go in a little cafe called the Cobweb in Stratford, where my husband and I did our early courting. And she was in there with her husband in those days. And so we would have something in common. So as we haven't met, I thought I'd better have that. Then I would like, having championed older women and the fact that still have a lot to offer and careers reinvented, I'm going to choose Mary Berry, please. P, because she's more famous in her 70s than she was, well, she's 80 plus now, than she was in her 40s, and has regenerated a tremendous business empire, still inspiring cooks of every shape, size, and age. And also, she's looks like a girl who would have a good evening. So I think she's very generous with the sherry and whatever when she's baking. So I think she would be great fun to have at the table.
I agree.
And then, if I may, it's a big ask, but I would like my mum to join the table. I mean, it's 8 years this week since she died. My mum was a tremendously brave character. She could regale us with tales of what she did during World War II, when she was involved in, she was Italian, my mum, so passionate cook, etc., but was involved obviously in occupied Italy, but assisting the Allies. So she has amazing stories that she eventually told when she was quite old. So that would be quite good, because she could do the head of the Secret Service thing then, couldn't she, with Judi Dench? So they'd have a bit of a mix. And I figure if it got too difficult, that Mary and my mum, both excellent cooks, could pop and finish off the meal. So I think that would be quite a good group. I'd be quite happy with that little group. But I'd like us to eat in the kitchen, please, because I don't want to miss anything. I'd like it to be at my table.
That sounds like an amazing night, and I'm so pleased. I mean, they're all fabulous guests, Sue, but I'm so pleased to have Maya Angelou, because funnily enough, another one of our guests this week, I won't say who, has also chosen Maya Angelou.
Actually.
Yeah, and I said to her that just took me straight back to secondary school as a slightly disinterested student, and then my wonderful English teacher reading Still I Rise, and it was from that moment on that I just thought, wow. And I read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and kind of read other work, and she was the most incredible human, a humanist, writer, personality, just
inspirational. And I think we would learn a lot really from what she had to say, and also comparisons around the table with what we thought the world might be like in the 1500s to what was then like in the 1900s. So on all that went between, that's so painful. But it would be good. And I think I've always felt to be in a very privileged position. I had a great education, state education, grammar school. I had a career that I loved. I have a very supportive husband, and I have my children, of whom I'm very proud. I suppose, you said, can you have it all? I suppose, well, yeah, that's a lot. But I still feel that as best we can, that we encourage young people, men and women, but in particular young women, as this is Women's Week, to be the best they can be, and not to let people confine them in a box, to define their horizons.
Absolutely.
Define your own horizons. And even more dangerous is if a woman feels she has to define her own and keep them tight. So don't let people box you in, and if possible, really surround yourself with the people who believe you can, as opposed to the ones who tell you that you can't, you won't be able to. I'm sure that's still happening. That's the pullback. And if you don't try, you'll never know. I know that sounds really trite, but people are not going to knock on the door and offer you your dream job. You're going to have to go out there and find it, or your dream career. And it doesn't matter whether you want to be a carer, a driver, a medic, in the art. It doesn't matter what you want to be. It's the same to me, applies in everything. Just be the best you can be. A bit of the Winnie the Pooh, really, isn't it? Really, where you do the braver than you think, stronger than you feel, and smarter than you think. That's plagiarized slightly, and it's not quite accurate, but it is that kind of thing. Keep Winnie the Pooh and Maya Angelou in mind, and you won't go far wrong.
With moral compasses, I think both of them. And what's really interesting about what you've just said, Sue, is that a lot of the advice from a lot of the women that I've been speaking to this week, to younger women or other women, is give it a go. Whatever it is, just try it. No matter what anyone says, just try it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. And I think the other thing that sometimes we do feel constrained is if you try it and it isn't for you, it takes courage actually to change direction.
Yeah.
So if you feel what you're doing is not right for you, then pick up that courage and do something else. I think there is a big world out there and you only know what you know. And a lot of us, me included, got sort of locked into something that I absolutely loved. But I'll never know now whether I would have loved something else because it never arose. But I think if I was unhappy in what I did, I'm pretty confident that I would have looked for something else. And I think it's always sad, I think, where you see someone who feels they had to stay in that track because they've chosen it, as opposed to saying, you know, this is not for me. But yeah, I would encourage, you know, all the young women that are following us and older women who are thinking now is their time. You know? Yeah, get out there, just be the best you can be. And if you get a knock, well, you take it in two ways. It does hurt, does it not? But don't let it define you. Actually, just crack on and you know, and just take it as a strength, really, and do something with it. Learn from it. Yeah. There's no greater satisfaction, is there, than that sort of secret smile when you think, oh, that went well.
Yeah, it's nice when that happens.
It is a little internal, just for yourself, secret smile, thinking,
yeah,
I love it when a plan comes together.
Little air punch.
Yes, try not to do it too big.
Just a little one.
Just a little one, yes, just a little one.
Well, so our 30 minutes of chat has turned into 45 minutes of chat.
I'm sorry.
No, not at all. Honestly, there is so much more I could ask you, but thank you for your time. It's been absolutely fascinating and a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for your invitation this week. It's an honour to be invited. I mean that. Thank you very much indeed.